Today we have a fascinating speaker from New Orleans, Louisiana, I want you to know. His name is John Clark. He is speaking to us on the Transfigurative community. John is a man of many gifts. He's a philosopher, activist, writer, and educator. Among his educational accomplishments are many of them at Loyola University in New Orleans, but he also is an educator with his grandson. He homeschooled his grandson in the last year. So he's a man of many talents. He's also the director of the Laterre Institute for Community and Ecology, and he's professor emeritus of philosophy at Loyola University. He taught there 44 years and was a member and former chair of the environment program. He, among other things, he directed a summer study program in India. Now, I want you to know about his latest book because it promises to be a real stimulus for our continued reading. The name of the book is Between Earth and Empire, and the subtitle is From the Necrocene to the Beloved Community. John, you may not realize how much your work intersects with the work we've been doing, presentations we've heard here, and also the work of the Center for Process Studies and ecological civilization. So we are so privileged to have you with us today. Thank you so much for giving your time. And I'm fascinated by the way you've blended philosophy, activism, and real work on social and ecological change. One of the things I didn't say, and I'm going to scroll down and find it now, is that you are involved in organizational and educational work with Laterre Institute, which we've already named. That's located in New Orleans and at the Bayou Laterre Woodland Center that is a coastal forest on the Gulf of Mexico. Being from Louisiana myself, I am really, really glad to see this because I'm aware of how much destruction has taken place in Louisiana and with oil and other causes. And the kind of work you're doing is life-giving. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. I want to especially thank Jay McDaniel for writing a wonderful text and sending it to me, which I got it this morning and read it. And it made me want to rewrite everything I had written because he singled out a lot of good points that I didn't, but I really appreciate his comments, and I hope we can talk about some of the things that he mentions in the discussion period. What I'm hoping to do is I did notes and some texts to present, and I hope that we could spend maybe a half hour on this. I'm not going to run too much over a half hour, but I'm planning on allowing most of the time for discussion because I'm sure that all of you have important things to say that we have to hear. So let's see how it goes. I kind of gave you an outline in the description of the talk of the major topics that I wanted to present. What I want to begin with is really the big picture. And one of the things that you'll see from my discussion is there are certain people who have really influenced me. And one is Thomas Berry. And I have a feeling that you've probably had a lot of interaction with his work. But his book, The Universe Story, and also Dream of the Earth and other works were very important for me. And also he spent many years doing a summer course at Loyola. So I got to know him as a friend and as a very admired mentor. And there are other people who will emerge in this discussion who have made a mark on my thinking. So to begin with, the big picture, I think it's very important really to think on the very big scale and on the very minute scale. We're going to talk about bioregionalism and localism and micro communities and so forth. But we also have to know where we are in the big history, the Earth history and the universe history. And right now, I actually, when I was teaching at Loyola, I stopped teaching there about 10 years ago to do other projects. But I started beginning every one of my classes, no matter what the topic was, with the same spiel that I wanted the students to know that we were in the 5th grade mass extinction of life on Earth, and that we are entering into a mass extinction, and that it's that if an extraterrestrial were sent to our planet to see what news there was, they would certainly take home to their home planet the news that this planet is going into a period of extinction that has only happened a few times in millions of years of life on Earth. So I found it very strange that some of my students had gone through 12 years of primary and secondary school and a few years of college and had not heard about these mass extinctions or the one that's beginning now. So the first part is that on the present moment of Earth history, we have left the Cenezoic, which, as you can tell from the name, meant a new era of life on Earth. And we've entered into the Necrocene, the new era of mass extinction and death on Earth. It's necessary to see our predicament as the result of a long history of various forms of empire and domination, and of certain dominant forms of egoic identity. It is the result of the dialectical development of the contradictions of civilization. At this crucial point in geohistory, we are faced with the choice of either continuing on the path of social and ecological disintegration, which is the choice of non-choice, or that of initiating a new path of social and ecological regeneration. The bad news is, as we're beginning to see clearly around the world, the default option, the choice of non-choice, is fascism, which will increasingly mutate into a form of eco-fascism as the inescapable crisis accelerates. Wilhelm Reich, in his famous book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, claimed that fascism is the normal character structure under civilization. He stated that in its pure form, fascism is the sum total of all the irrational reactions of the average human character. As a matter of fact, I appreciated the fact that last week's session had some important and deep discussions of the problem of fascism. Wilhelm Reich, who was writing in the 30s and 40s and a little bit after that, was in some ways ahead of his time. Fascism, whether the statist version, the corporate version, or one of various hybrids, is an automatic mass reaction to crisis and decline. We are entering the most challenging era of social and ecological crisis, and the greatest threat of decline, climate catastrophe, mass extinction, in all of human geohistory. The only effective way to escape social ecological catastrophe and the destructive ideologies of denial and disavowal that it generates is to transform people and communities deeply. So the second part of the big picture is going to be a whirlwind tour of the history of human revolutions and the possibility of another revolution. Most of the revolutions have not been short events. They've been long processes of change, of evolution, turning into revolutionary change. Our first revolution was the humanization revolution, the revolution that made us into human beings who could live in groups, who could show compassion, who could take care of children, who could cooperate. It was a humanization process which involved counter-dominance strategies in which the alpha males who dominated in earlier pre-human hominid societies were overthrown, in which human beings learned to live in cooperative bands and tribes, in which hunting and gathering was organized, in which there was communal management of goods, in which there was the development from bands to tribal structures to villages, and there was a nature spirituality that helped people interpret the world that they lived in. The second revolution was the agricultural revolution, which took many thousands of years, but was a revolution. It established sedentary societies, the large-scale exploitation of the land, patriarchy, the state and empire, the growth of cities, the institution of private and state property, written language, and hierarchical religion. The third revolution, we're beginning to get close to our own, really very close to our own instant in geohistory. The Industrial Revolution was a revolution that established the modern nation state and the global state system. It established capitalism, global imperialism, individualism as the established form of personhood, neo-patriarchy, mass society, processes of regimentation and fragmentation, and a reaction of mass revolutionary movements. The fourth revolution, and this has only happened in the lifetime of most of us, is the digital cybernetic revolution, which established an integrated global system, the emergence of superpowers, mega corporations, financial oligarchies, techno-fascism, advanced planetary domination, the development of ecocidal weapons of mass destruction, processes of micro-control of the mind, and the hegemony of financialized consumptionist capitalism, which in a sense has become the spirituality of today. The fifth revolution is one that hasn't happened yet. It would be a rehumanization revolution. It would, in fact, be a detour from the whole history of civilization in which human beings regain the cooperative community, the practice of widespread mutual aid, a spirituality and an ethos of mutuality with the rest of the natural world, processes of living as earth beings, living as beings within the cosmos, and some of us would sum it up as the creation of the beloved community or the recreation of the beloved community. I think it's important to realize the magnitude of this project of a fifth revolution. It would be the first example of a conscious change by humanity in the direction of geohistory since the beginning of humanization. All of these other revolutions have happened unconsciously. They have been a reaction to the state, the conditions of life and of the ecosystems, of technological development, and so forth. So in effect, we have to do something that has never been done before in the history of human beings. So the question for us is, what kind of beings can we become to make ourselves capable of carrying out such a transformation? The next section is, we call it right livelihood. I think it's useful to think about a famous statement by the philosopher Theodor Adorno, who said in one of his books, "Wrong life cannot be lived rightly." Adorno, perhaps inadvertently, given his very pessimistic state of mind, points to the importance of the need for right livelihood, for a break with wrong life. My assumption is we are capable of breaking with wrong life, however dominant it is, however deeply it affects all that we do. We cannot live 90%, 95%, or 99% of our lives in a wrong life world and expect to create out of it the right life world. We also cannot live most of our lives in a merely imagined world, no matter how good it is, or live in some refuge of the beautiful soul, as Hegel called it, and expect to create out of it the right life world. You have no doubt heard of the idea of being in the world, but not of the world. We should take this idea seriously. It means really being in it, in the world, immersed in it, and at the same time, really not of it, not possessed by it. In the Buddhist tradition, right livelihood is understood in the context of what are called the three jewels, or the three gems, which are the awakened mind, the way of truth, or the way of nature, and the compassionate community, which are called in that tradition Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. One sutra that I really love is called the Upada Sutta, the Half Sutra. In it, the Buddha's disciple Ananda says, "Sir, good friends, companions, and associates are half the spiritual life." Shakyamuni Buddha replies, "Not so, Ananda, not so, Ananda. Good friends, companions, and associates are the whole of the spiritual life." I loved it when I found this sutra. It means you can't have Buddha, the awakened mind. You can't have Dharma, the way of nature, the way of truth, unless you have the awakened community, the good community, the wise and compassionate community. So for me, I interpret this as meaning created together and created now. This is everything. This reminds me of the works of a thinker who has influenced me a lot, the great German communitarian philosopher Gustav Landauer, who said, "Example is everything." He was one of the advocates of creating liberated communities, compassionate communities, and he had faith that if we created them, they would be so good that people would want to live that way. It puts us on the spot. We can create a lot of things that sound good, but they're not good enough to inspire people to change their life. But Landauer said a powerful force is what he called positive envy. Envy is one of the great vices, but there can be a positive kind of envy. We could call it admiration. We could call it looking to the good, but it's a force that makes us capable of transforming ourselves. Okay, next part of the talk is spheres of social determination. This is something that I worked on in these last two books. One was called The Impossible Community. The other was called Between Earth and Empire, subtitled in part, The Beloved Community. We should never forget what our hope and our goal is. In order to achieve such a transformation, and maybe I should say now why I use the word transfiguration. I use it for two reasons, really, the transfigurative community. One part of it is because of the deep spiritual meaning of transfiguration and the far-reaching nature of such an experience and such a process. And the other is in reaction to the word prefiguration, which is very popular among people like me. A lot of my friends and colleagues use the word prefiguration. And I think it's a good word, but not good enough for us now. It's too late to just prefigure a future world. We need it now, or we won't have a future world. So I think it's important to think about what we're up against. How can we change the world? We have to change the world because the problem is worldwide. We live in a globalized society, and we want to live in an Earth society. So we have to transform that globalized society so we can live in a culture of earth. So we need strategies, but there's a problem with strategic thinking. If you look at the word strategy, it comes from the art of a general, the science of war, from the French stratégie. And the French word comes from is a Latinized form of the Greek word strategeia, the office or command of a general. And there are other origins, but that's basically the idea. So what we need is a non-strategic strategy. We need non-strategic strategic thinking. A lot of people say, if only we could find enough billionaires to finance what we're doing. Well, we don't really need financing anything. We need changing ourselves and our communities. So in order to do that, I think we have to think about how societies become the way they are. I'm going to be very brief on this. I spent a lot of time in 2 books going into the details, and I barely got into it at all. But the project of social transformation and communal transfiguration will need to address all the basic spheres of social determination. This doesn't mean determinism, but it means that things are systematically determined, and unless you change the determinants, you're not going to see vast changes in society that we absolutely need at this point in geohistory. These spheres include the social imaginary, the social ideology, the social ethos, the social institutional structure, and social materiality. I find most social theories and social strategies ignoring some of these and focusing on others. The most common thing in the academic world is to focus on social ideology and pretend that if we change ideas, we're going to change the world. But if you don't change practice, I won't go into this, but Pascal's wager could be applied to this. If you read Pascal's writing about how to become a Christian, basically, he says, you start practicing. You go to church, you take holy water, all this stuff. You do all the practices, and miraculously, you become a croyant. You believe. Well, that's how it happens. Unless you do it, you don't become it. You have to think it. You have to imagine it, but you also have to do it in order to become it. And that's where we often fail. And I've failed 99% of the time. I'm just hoping that I can keep trying, and the 1% will go somewhere and other people will pick it up. But there are a lot of people working on it. So I say that we have to work on this very hard. This will involve an investigation of the meaning or meanings of everything, of time, of space, of place, of being, of value, of relation, of life, of the world, of nature, and everything else that's important, and an exploration of what they can possibly mean in the context of the community, as I call it, the community of awakening and care, the beloved community. We're faced with a big challenge. Change must take place simultaneously in all of these spheres, and it must take place at all levels of organization or social relations, including the personal level, the level of primary groups, the level of larger groups, and the level of the entire society. So one of our problems, and I'll mention, I think, along the way, the problem of attention is, in a sense, the most central problem we have. We have a society that's wonderful at distracting people. There's a book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. I mean, that's kind of the idea. We have a lot of ways to keep our mind, or there have been created a lot of ways of keeping our minds off the things that are most important. And one of these, I might focus specifically on ethos, on practice, on culture. And ethos, of course, is also the word we get ethics from. And one of the things that's very important is that there's a split between our moral ideals and our ethical practice. I recommend Hegel on this. He's a great philosopher on this subject. He talked about the difference between Moralität and Sittlichkeit. Moralität is this abstract morality, like Kant's morality. It's this wonderful dream world we can live in and become inspired by, but we don't affect the real world very much, or not very well. But there's also this world that he called Sittlichkeit, which is the ethical world order or disorder. And we have to make a mark on that order. We have to transform that order. And of course, that means transforming ourselves in the process. One of the things we can do is learn from earth cultures, the cultures of nature and place. And we can learn from our ancestors. We can learn from the practices of traditional people who are still close to traditions of appreciation and celebration of nature and place. There's a wonderful book called Freedom and Culture by the anthropologist Dorothy Lee. And she gives the example in that book of an indigenous hunter who walks along a stream running north-south, and he walks north to his hunting ground. And he's bitten by a mosquito, and he says, "Ouch, I was just bitten on my east arm by a mosquito." And later that day, he walks back to his village and he says, "My west arm is still itching from that mosquito bite." And I think that tells us something about what kind of world we don't live in and what kind of world we could live in. A world in which what's around us, the living nature, is absolutely basic to our whole way of thinking. There was an article in Discovery magazine that talks about cultures in which people automatically know and describe location in terms of the directions. They won't tell you to, they certainly won't tell you to take a certain boulevard to get somewhere. They also won't tell you turn left at something, or they'll tell you turn south, go northwest, and the points of demarcation along the way, which Gary Snyder did a wonderful story in one of his books, probably Practice of the Wild, which is my favorite, in which he talks about going on a truck ride with an Australian Aboriginal person who knew all the songs and stories about places, and they went through the countryside. And the problem was he was singing his songs at an unbelievable rate of speed because they were meant to be sung while you were walking through the countryside, but he was in a truck passing them by. But the fact is, this is a very deep experience, our experience of place, our experience of the sacredness of place, our orientation of our life in relation to place. Did anybody see Black Robe, the movie Black Robe? It's about the Jesuits in among the Iroquois, and there's a story in that film about someone who loses his way in the forest. It's this Jesuit priest who's a friend of the Indians, and he loses his way in the forest, and then eventually he thinks he's lost and he's never going to make it back to the community. And finally, he finds his way back. He hears someone talking, and he runs up to the person, and he says to the person, "I'm so happy to see you. I was completely lost in the forest." And the indigenous person says, "What happened? You forgot to look at the trees?" Okay, that's the difference between civilization and a society of nature. One more thing about ethos. There's a young man named Dylan Fitzwater who was a college student. He wrote his undergraduate thesis on the socio-culture and language of Chiapas. And he went down to Chiapas and studied socio with a Zapatista language school and learned about the practices and the values of the culture, and also about the Zapatista revolution. The Zapatistas were these European people, influenced people who went to the countryside to revolutionize the Indians, and they were converted by the Indians. They changed their ideology completely. They found that the native people already had what they were trying to create, and they had it in a much better form. So I wanted to say a few words about what Dylan Fitzwater wrote in his book, Autonomy is in Our Hearts, which a friend of mine and I helped get published at our publisher, PM Press, when we found out about this honors thesis that the student had done. And it's an amazing text because it's all based on his interviews with indigenous people. Fitzwater spent time interviewing people from the various indigenous cultures about their world and about their participation in the Zapatista revolution. He found that the achievements of the revolution were rooted deeply in the traditional values of the people. He learned especially from the Tzotzil, since he learned Tzotzil at a Zapatista language school. He found that one of the most personally, communally, and politically significant concepts in Tzotzil culture is Ichbai Tamuk. This Tzotzil phrase is defined by Fitzwater as to bring Ichil, one another, Ba, to largeness or greatness, Tamuk. Bringing one another to greatness is what it means. It implies the coming together of a big collective heart. The reader of his book may be surprised when Fitzwater reveals that the phrase can also be translated simply as democracy. Imagine what it would mean if we thought of as democracy as bringing ourselves together to greatness and coming together of a big collective heart. We would live in a very different kind of community. Obviously, the Zapatistas impart a much fuller and deeper meaning to this term than that found in the impoverished conception of democracy inherited from the Western liberal tradition, which of course is falling apart anyway. The Zapatista concept is a profoundly social, ecological one, since it implies respect for and recognition of all beings in both the natural and social worlds, which are really seen as one continuous world. It combines aspects of the ethics and politics of care with an ethics and politics of social and ecological flourishing. In this sense, it is one of the most radical and far-reaching conceptions of democracy yet to appear. And of course, it appeared many generations ago. Another important distinction I think we have to make is between planetization and globalization, between becoming planetary beings as opposed to living in abstract space to be managed and dominated by human beings. Here, some of my mentors have influenced me a lot. I mentioned Gary Snyder's book, The Practice of the Wild. He has one wonderful chapter called On the Path, Off the Trail. And of course, that's inspired by Taoism, which is about the Tao, which is the way or the path or even the trail. And I spent 35 years on the land out at Bayou La Terre. So I've spent a lot of time on trails and making trails and thinking about trails. So this really resonates with me. Gary Snyder said, the truly experienced person, the refined person, delights in the ordinary. And it was mentioned, I spent a year homeschooling my grandson, who really needed help and has done wonderfully. And one thing that occurs to me is that I also taught in a cooperative nursery preschool for a number of years with two of my children. And one of the things I learned is that in many ways we begin as that experienced person, as that refined person who delights in the ordinary. As it's often been said that philosophy begins with wonder, and the young child is the being who lives in a world of wonder, a magical world. Okay, another of my mentors was Thomas Berry. who said many, many wise things. He said, nature is the great educator. The earth is the great educator. He wrote a book called The Great Work. He wrote a lot of great works. His book with Brian Swim, The Universe Story, is certainly something everybody should read and ponder and put into practice, because it's about making the universe story our sacred story today. And somehow there are a lot of evangelical movements in the world, but there hasn't been enough evangelizing, I think, for that sacred story. It's the one we all started with, our ancestors started with. He talks about, in one essay called The Meadow Across the Creek, he talks about his own childhood. He said he loved this meadow across the creek. And it suddenly occurred to him that what he really needed to do was protect that meadow from all the threats that threatened to destroy it. In a way, it's guided him for his whole life. If he could think about this beautiful, miraculous, magical place, which is what the whole world is, really, or was. For Thomas Berry, the great work is a process of devoting our attention to both the great and the small. In his book, The Dream of the Earth, he includes several chapters on the need for bioregional awareness. We can't just think about the universe or about the earth. We have to think about the place where we are, just as he thought about the meadow across the creek. A bioregional awareness really means paying attention to all the complexity, all the diversity, all the specificity, and all the abundant creativity of the natural world. And of course, Thomas Berry is famous as one of the inspirations of creation spirituality. And I know, as so many of you as Whiteheadians realize, that Whitehead called the ultimate force in this universe creativity. It's the ultimate category in his thought. One year when Thomas Berry taught his summer course at Loyola, one of my grandchildren, Brendan, had recently been born. Thomas did a welcome to the universe ceremony for Brendan, in which he introduced him to the universe, to the stars, to the planet, to the earth, to the animals, to the plants, to the human community. I'm extremely grateful for this wonderful ceremony. However, its implication is that it must be more than a one-time event. This is what such a ceremony implies. We must continue to live in that universe, on that earth, in relation to the universe community and the earth community. As we develop an earth ethos and a place ethos, we will have daily and moment-to-moment practices and rituals, reintroducing ourselves to these realities, to ourselves outside ourselves. And this reminds me of the most famous quote by the great Soto Zen philosopher Dogen: to study the way of the awakened mind is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. Well, I'm going to skip the next part because it's on dialectic, which I'd love to go over, but I see it's already 45 minutes. So let me just talk about the last section in 5 minutes. If we're dedicated to the creation of the beloved community, the community of awakening care, we will look for guidance and wisdom from the achievements of our ancestors. We will look back to the seeming miracle of humanization and to the legacy of humanization, to the long and rich global history of non-dominating communal organization. I will end with a brief analysis. I wanted to talk about several things, but maybe I can at least mention one, which is the Sarvodaya movement in India. For years, I read about Sarvodaya. I read Jeffrey Ostergaard's book about it. But in 2001, I went to a World Peace Conference in Kolkata. And by chance, I was assigned a roommate named E.P. Menon, who turned out to be one of the leaders of the Gandhian movement, or Sarvodaya, who had walked across India with Vinoba Bhave. who was the successor to Gandhi. He also took a long walk from India to Western Europe. Then he flew to Boston and walked to Washington. Then he flew to Japan, walked across Japan, and ended up in Hiroshima on Hiroshima Day. And I learned from him a lot about the practice of Sarvodaya, which means the welfare of all. It's a movement that incorporated all the spheres of social determination, social ideology, imaginary, ethos, institutions, and materiology. Sarvodaya means the welfare of all, and it's the name of what has often been called the Gandhian movement. It's a program of revolutionary social transformation based on a radical libertarian and communitarian concept of the common good. By the way, that's not libertarian in the cryptocurrency American sense of the word. Here are some of the major concepts, which I'm going to not read, but I'll summarize very quickly. One is Swadeshi, which is to produce things on your own land, to appreciate the land, and to care for it. This is one of the bioregional concepts. Another is Shopao, which is the ancient tradition of a sacred space at the center of the community, which is something that we can find in our communities if we look at the history of these communities. One of the major concepts, Gandhi wrote a book on it, was Swaraj. He wrote a book called Village Swaraj, which is self-rule, self-determination. The idea, to quote Gandhi, was continuous effort to be independent of government control, whether it's foreign government or national. It means community control, grassroots democracy, horizontalism, municipalism are some of the words that have been used recently for this. In Gandhi's words, the state represents violence in an organized and concentrated form. The individual has a soul, but as the state is a soulless machine, it can never be weaned from violence to which it owes its very existence. This is realism on the part of Gandhi. Einstein supposedly said insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Gandhi wanted to do a different thing. Another concept is mutual aid and cooperation. That's the alternative, a system of non-coercive, voluntary cooperation. Another concept is satyagraha, which comes from the word satya, which means truth. It really has the implication of truth and being, and agraha, which means firmness, insistence, or holding to. Gandhi also described it as love force or soul force. We can talk about some of these more. Another are the institutions of the Panchayat and the Gram Sabha. Some people act as if these things were invented in Europe or North America a few years ago, but they're ancient traditions. The Panchayat is the village committee of elders of 5 people or 5 elected people who are like the council of the village or the neighborhood. The Gram Sabha is the village assembly or the neighborhood assembly. And Sarvodaya thought that control had to be returned to the level of people who were living their lives in place and that they would make the best possible decisions. They developed a core of people called Gram Sevaks, which is a body of dedicated, trained Sarvodaya workers. In the 1960s, there were 5,000 full-time workers and 20,000 part-time workers. The idea is that you have to have some people training to work full-time for, what Gandhi saw as a peaceful revolution. The Shanti Sena was the army of peace mediators or the peace army, which in every community applied nonviolent method to conflict resolution. The Charka it's the same word as chakra, which is a wheel, like the Dharma chakra. But the Charka was the spinning wheel, and it was the symbol of the movement. And Khadi, which is homespun, was also a symbol of the movement. Spinning is a communal activity. It can be a meditative activity. Khadi, or homespun fabric, is beautiful, useful, durable, and became a symbol of communal solidarity and the rejection of empire and exploitative trade. And 2 very important programs they had were Budan and Gramdan. which meant the gift of land and the gift of the village. And the Sarvodaya workers, including E.P. Menon, walked across India asking people to donate land to cooperative production. 4.2 million acres were donated as Bhudan, and over 1 million acres had been transferred to nearly 500,000 landless workers. The idea was Gramdan, when so much of the community had become cooperative, the entire village, it meant gift of a village. The village people would give the gift to themselves. The citizens of the village would make it a cooperative community practicing Swaraj. And then the final thing, which I know I ran over, but I just have to say that I think their most brilliant invention was the ashram. Most people think of the ashram as some kind of religious community, but an ashram is a community of practice. It means really dedicating yourself to some kind of practice. In this case, it was the practice of cooperative production, communal self-sufficiency, humane participatory forms of technology, sexual equality, social equality beyond caste and class, spiritual realization, and solidarity and mutual aid in all endeavors. It's a small cooperative eco-village that would show the way to a better future through example. Their goal was to create an ashram in every village and every neighborhood of India. And that way, many, many people would begin practicing. This would be the transfigurative community, not the prefigurative community, but the community in which people actually live their ideals, live what they hope for. So in conclusion, I think the solution is that you need to be able to walk to utopia from wherever you are. And better yet, you must be able to live in utopia today. That's it.
John, that was remarkable. Thank you so very much.